I'm going to look in this video and one or two subsequent follow-up videos at Natasha Crane, conservative evangelical apologist, being interviewed by Greg Kokel from Stand to Reason, talking about progressive Christianity, saying things that are demonstrably false, and also, in a sense, self-refuting, because the very claims she makes about progressive Christians actually reflect back on evangelicals in a very ironic way, on which she seems completely unself-aware. So let's take a look at the clip and then we'll debrief.
Progressive church and where did it come from and what do they believe and why are they a threat?
Yeah, well, there's a lot that we can cover with this, but it's hard to define progressive Christianity in a lot of ways because if you meet two different progressive Christians, you're probably going to meet two people with very different beliefs. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
really big underlying reason for that, and that's because progressive Christians, what unites them in their beliefs is that they tend to reject the ultimate authority of the Bible. So they definitely, in most cases, appreciate the Bible in some sense, in a loose sense. They'll say, yeah, I think the Bible was inspired, meaning that maybe people were inspired to write about God based on their experiences over time, but they don't see the Bible as God's authoritative word of truth that is relevant and applicable for all time.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of all evolving so that we now as humans have a better understanding of things. So it kind of follows from that if you don't accept the same source of truth as a biblical Christian would, you're going to end up with all kinds of beliefs because you have no objective basis for your beliefs anymore. You're
Mm-hmm.
just in a place of picking and choosing what you believe to be the truth about reality. You probably, if you're still identifying with the label of Christian in some sense, have an additional appreciation for Jesus, a love for Jesus. You think that he's a good moral teacher, maybe more than some people who are purely irreligious. But at the same time, you're still putting yourself in this position of picking and choosing.
So first thing she says here is, well, it's hard to define progressive Christianity because there's nothing that unites them except for the fact that they reject the authority of the inspiration of the Bible and authority of the Bible. Now, first thing just to note here is that when she talks about this, she doesn't name any names. So there's no way here to test what she's saying by actually going back to the sources of the people, seeing what they write, what they say. Second thing is she's using weasel words, I say, what I call them, or these qualifications that are weasel words. For example, she doesn't say they reject the authority or inspiration of the Bible. She says they tend to, and tend to automatically puts an interpretive patina or gloss upon the analysis. In other words, this allows her the out to say, well, okay, maybe they're not actually saying they reject the authority of the Bible, but my view is that they are doing so. And which is it? See, this is where she's now can play off on the ambiguity of her statements. Did she actually claim that they outright reject the authority of the Bible and inspiration of the Bible? Or is it just her view that their views undermine the authority or inspiration of the Bible? Those are two different things. Which is it? And it's not at all clear. Now, the next thing to note is that it is empirically false. I am a progressive Christian. I accept the plenary inspiration of the Bible. Who are the other people who we would call progressive Christians? Well, Natasha Crane is closely aligned with Alyssa Childers. So Alyssa Childers, in her book Against Progressive Christianity, she identifies people like Brian Zond, Rachel Held Evans, Peter Enns. Those are leading progressive Christians, according to Alyssa Childers. Each one of those people explicitly affirms the inspiration of the Bible. They don't deny it. The divine inspiration of the Bible. None of those people believes the Bible is simply, quote unquote, inspired in the same way that a poet might have been inspired through subjective experience to write a poem, which is what she suggests here. On the contrary, every one of those individuals, like me, believes the Bible is divinely inspired word. So it's just false. What she is spreading here is misinformation. And if she's aware of how false it is, then it becomes disinformation. I do believe that evangelical apologists like Crane, they have there's a bias or a motivation, whether they're aware of it or not, to promote this kinds of false claims about fellow Christians. And that motivation is this, that their ministries do well when they can identify threats. Note that at the very beginning of the interview clip, Hochul says, how should we think about this threat of progressive Christianity, of fellow Christians? They're a threat. And if you can promote this sense of fear or paranoia about fellow Christians who are a threat, who are infiltrating the church, and if you can now equip your evangelical constituency to identify this threat and to fight against the threat, that raises your profile. It helps sell books. It helps you to go to conferences. It gets you invitations to speak on podcasts and radio shows to warn about the threat. And so I'm not claiming this is necessarily a conscious thing, but I think that people like Crane have a bias toward finding enemies and othering people in order to promote their ministry. And I think that's just what's going on here. You have to create a threat. You end up spreading misinformation about fellow Christians who accept the divine inspiration of the Bible because you need to have a threat infiltrating the church. Now, the next thing to note is what is so ironic. What is so ironic here is she says, well, there's nothing that unifies progressive Christians. There's so much diversity among progressive Christianity. And I want to say, Natasha Crane, do you know anything about evangelical Christianity? Do you know that Kenneth Copeland, a Word of Faith charismatic preacher, is considered an evangelical? So is Beth Moore, I think a very centrist Baptistic teacher. So is Doug Wilson, like a theonomist living in Moscow, Idaho. Those three people have almost nothing in common, and yet they're all considered evangelicals. The term evangelical is no less diverse and expansive in its meaning than the term progressive Christian. And to identify you yourself as an evangelical doesn't actually tell a person very much at all about what you believe, just like progressive Christian. So to look at the speck in the eye of the progressive Christian community and say, look how diverse that community is to show the plank you have in your own eye with respect to how dizzyingly diverse and fractured the confessing evangelical community is. And that is a deep problem here. You need to so do a little bit of self introspection before you criticize progressive Christians. And then when she argues, oh, well, obviously, this diversity in the progressive Christian community is just a product of the fact that they don't accept the divine inspiration of the Bible, which, as we've seen, is false. But that simply raises the question back onto you. This is what we call being hoist with your own petard. So now we say, okay, then I guess evangelicals don't accept the authority of the Bible because look at all the diversity we have within the confessing evangelical community. Everybody from Kenneth Copeland to Beth Moore to Doug Wilson is an evangelical. Well, I guess we shouldn't listen to evangelicals then. The last thing I want to note here, which is just, she just touches upon it at the end of the interview clip, is that she talks about how on the progressive view, there's a sort of development with respect to the Bible. What what is the problem here is, I mean, of course there's a development. What you see here in Natasha Crane's comments is a naive ahistoricism about the Bible. First of all, you need to understand that our understanding of what the Bible is developed over centuries. It took centuries to identify a clear canon. The earliest list we have of the canon comes from about the 190s. It's the Muratorian canon, a collection of 22 books in the New Testament. The list of the 27 books that we have in our New Testament now, the first record of it comes in Athanasius's Festal Letter, which is in the 4th century. And of course, the fact that Athanasius wrote a festal letter referencing these 27 New Testament books only tells us what people in the region that Athanasius was doing ministry in the 300s believed to be a New Testament. It doesn't tell us that that was a unified understanding of the New Testament over the entire Roman Empire. And certain books, like the book of Revelation, were disputed for centuries. So the emergence of what is a New Testament canon is enormously complex, to say nothing of the complexity of identifying an Old Testament canon. And then, of course, we have disputes down to our own day as to what constitutes an Old Testament canon and whether a deuterocanon of books should be included within the Old Testament. So, is the Old Testament 66 books or 73 books or something else? Christians disagree on that. It's complex, to say nothing of the diversity of translations and of translation philosophy, of textual criticism. And then you have the whole issue of your theology and your interpretation, your hermeneutic of the Bible. If you study theology, Natasha Crane, you will learn that Christians down through history have disputed the understanding of the Bible, which is one of the reasons you get the enormous diversity you find among people ranging from Kenneth Copeland, Beth Moore, to Doug Wilson, and on. Is that people have different hermeneutics, different understandings, interpretation of the Bible for a dizzying range of reasons, not just because people do or do not accept the inspiration of the Bible. So the same complexities that you have among progressive Christians, you find among evangelicals, and you find throughout Christian history. And it is this kind of really shallow theological analysis and outright false theological analysis that you get from people like Natasha Crane, which is so frustrating because what she does is she now poisons the well against people who may identify as progressive Christian. They're struggling with their faith, they're trying to figure something out. And then she's now telling other evangelicals, those are not Christians at all, those are threats. Those are people who are undermining the gospel and who have rejected the authority and inspiration of the Bible, none of which is true, but which only serves to fracture the church, spread misinformation, even as she promotes her own ministry.